Capital Seoul is poised to put in motion an ambitious project ultimately aimed at boosting national birth rates and promoting the presence of female workers in the local labour force. So how does the project seek to secure these goals? What legal framework is necessary to ensure the success of this project? And what is the broader response to this pilot project by the capital city? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today we delve into efforts by Capital Seoul to address some of its domestic challenges by opening its doors wider to foreign workers. For this, I have Professor Song Sye-ryun at Kyung Hee University live on the line from the US. Professor Song, as always, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I also have Kwon Soa with us, so it's good to have you here.
Happy to be here, Sunny.
Right, let's start here in the studio then. Soa, let's begin with some details about Seoul's pilot project, which involves opening its doors to foreign domestic workers.
Right, around 100 foreign domestic workers or domestic helpers are expected to be part of this project. They will be introduced from Southeast Asia, most of them from the Philippines. And the reason for why the Philippines is being mentioned the most is because the Philippines has an existing training program for such domestic workers. So probably out of the 100, the majority will be from the Philippines. So South Korea's Ministry of Employment and Labor announced last week that they will be working in households that need an extra hand in the capital, Seoul. But this will only be confined to couples or singles in their 20s to 40s who have children or are expecting children. So that could be working parents, single moms or dads, and households with pregnant women. And this is expected to happen in the second half of the year. We are already in the second half, but there is no specific date set yet. And they will be paid at least the country's legal minimum wage of $9,621 an hour. That's roughly $7.3 US. State-authorized dormitories will serve as residences for the workers. The foreign housekeepers will be given an E9 visa, which is a non-professional employment visa, and they will be able to work for a minimum of 6 months in Seoul under the pilot program, either full-time or part-time. The workers will also be screened based on a number of factors and trained for the program before departure as well as upon arrival.
Right, I see. And all that being said then, Professor Song, what legal additions or adjustments need to be made to support Seoul's pilot project?
I think that this represents a legitimate state interest in promoting a certain benefits for people concerned. The live-in or part-time nannies are, of course, a legitimate job and have a shortage of those workforces in the domestic market. And granting employment-related visas for foreign applicants is also a normal policy in most countries. So in terms of getting a minimum wage, it also boosts the legality and dispels the concern that this is abusive policies. But I think that with the legality of it, of course, there are some concerns. Foreign workers, for example, Korea has had some unfortunate histories of abusing the foreign workers in certain cases. And also, there are human rights issues potentially with all the migrant workers. So I think that how we proceed with this and what kind of trainings, what kind of programs, and also what kind of remedies if the problem arises would be big issues.
Right, of course, which is why it is currently a pilot project at the moment undertaken by Capital Seoul then. So now I understand a number of factors are behind this latest project. Tell us about them.
Well, obviously, there seems to be demand for foreign domestic workers, and why? It's for the same reason for why foreign laborers are employed for other occupations in Korea as well, which is the costs are lower. As I mentioned before, these workers will earn at least the minimum wage of 9,621 per hour. That's going to rise next year as well. That would be roughly 2 million won a month for a full-time housekeeper if they work 8 hours for 5 days, which would amount to 40 hours a week. So while Korean nannies on average receive more than 15,000 won an hour, which is $11.4. Full-time domestic workers living with their employers usually make 3.5 to 4.5 million won a month. That would be up to some $3,410. Also, the number of domestic workers in the country is on the decline, and the workforce in the child service sector is aging. In fact, according to the Labor Ministry, in 2019, there were some 156,000 people working in the sector, and last year, the number dropped to 114,000. And also, 92.3% are in their 50s and above. Even a more important factor behind this is the low birth rate in the country. The government, and as we're focusing on this pilot program in Seoul, more specifically the Seoul metropolitan government's ultimate goal is to tackle the low birth rate in the city and then ultimately in the country by hiring foreign nannies to make childcare a lesser burden for young couples as more and more choose to not have children. And speaking of the low birth rate, Korea's fertility rate last year was at 0.78, which means one woman in her entire life gives birth to less than one child on average. But the figure in the capital Seoul was even lower at 0.59.
Right, which has triggered quite a bit of alarm here in the capital city, of course. Professor Song, despite expectations for these foreign domestic workers to receive the minimum wage, I understand there has been some debate over the potential wage range for these foreign domestic workers, that is. Do you care to explain this for us?
Well, the controversy was greater when this was actually introduced as a form of a legislative proposal by one of the congressmen. Apparently, there is an international market, especially in Hong Kong and Singapore, using foreign domestic workers, and their minimum wages are different from their local norms. International market price, if we can call it that, it's about $300 to $700 range a month. And the bill introduced initially was to carve out exceptions for Korea's minimum wage so that we'll pay the international market price. I think that would have been much more controversial. But in terms of paying out the minimum wage wages in Korea, probably that is not much of an issue. However, I think that it's not just the monthly wage. There are other expenses and other circumstances that surrounds the foreign workers in terms of economic situations. So we have to look at the totality of what kind of economic sense it makes and whether we are forcing the foreign workers to work under unfavorable or the conditions that are not pursuant to the international standard in terms of working environment. So those would be the issues.
Right, I see. And talking about issue, Professor Song, before we advance any further, I understand there was an act. It's called the Act on Employment Improvement of Domestic Workers, and it went into effect, if I'm not mistaken, last year. But there seems to be a bit of controversy over this particular act as well. Could you tell us a bit more about that? I understand critics are claiming that the act is inadequate to protect the rights of domestic workers.
Right. Most of the issues have to do with the work itself could involve many instances of human rights violations. It's a workplace where domestic workers, especially the foreign ones, are subjected to culturally different practices and also different systems of addressing any kind of remedies. So in terms of having the sufficient details, a lot of critics are saying, well, do we have enough system and enough clauses to mount this kind of work and practices in a very smooth manner? So forecasting or anticipating all those shortcomings, there were criticism coming from, especially from the civil rights organizations.
Right, I see. So, in the meantime then, what has been the response from the public here with regard to Seoul's ambitious project?
Starting with those who welcome this project, it's for the same reasons as the government. Korea's workforce is aging, meaning the workforce is declining, while the need for housekeeping and childcare services is on the rise, especially because both parents want to work in many cases or actually need to work. And this was a point made by an application service that found there was interest from users for foreign domestic workers. They have conducted a survey and announced the results during the public hearing last week regarding this pilot program. And also now on the other side, regarding the criticism or opposition, I want to mention two major points. The first one is money, although it's going to be more affordable to have foreign domestic workers. If you compare around 3 million won that you would pay Korean workers versus around 2 million won for foreign workers a month, in the latter case, there can be some communication issues as well as cultural issues. So parents would kind of weigh between those two options they have. And the second issue that is being raised is regarding trust in foreigners looking after one's children. So some opinions by mothers that were made was that they would be okay with household work, household chores, but not sure about childcare due to cultural differences that cannot be taught within a short span. Now, the Labor Ministry stressed, though, that the pilot program is, in fact, a pilot program. It's not the final version of the introduction of a new system. So it plans to collect more public opinion to make this a workable program. So for now, it looks like there is some amount of skepticism.
Right, I see. Professor Song, keeping in mind the concerns of potential discrimination that you highlighted earlier against these foreign domestic workers here in the country, what legal framework do you propose to perhaps better protect their rights?
Well, I think that we have a pretty good system and the provisions already in place. But in terms of dealing with the foreign workers, we're kind of have been going through a trial and error period. I think we've gotten much better in terms of providing the major issues that are facing the foreign workers. However, I'll have to say that as a society, we still have ways to learn and mature as to how to live with foreign workers and immigrants in our society. As Soa mentioned earlier, we are facing a population cliff, and it is a very big issue that the future generations will be much less in numbers because of the babies are not forthcoming. And in terms of addressing those issues, I think that this foreign domestic worker or the nannies would address a very narrow but very important aspect, which is the economics of it. We became a society somehow that we cannot afford to have babies in many cases, which is deplorable. So in terms of how to make that possible, I think that there are some principles. For example, in the workplace, corporate social responsibility, business and human rights principles, and ESG all stress a fair and human rights sensitive working environment and the conditions. So I think that as employers and as a society, we have to be very sensitive to those trends and principles so that they will be applied to even the foreign nanny situation. So that I think it's going to be a learning process. I welcome the prospect of having those kind of, at least, pilot projects to begin to address very serious issues of our birth rate.
Professor Song, this is an impromptu question, but keeping in mind you're mentioning, of course, of the shrinking demographic portrait here in South Korea, some scholars have suggested opening our doors wider to immigration in general. Where do you stand on that particular suggestion?
Well, I think we have to just follow the trend, which is that we are a globalized society, and we have been kind of kept aloof somewhat in terms of immigration. But look at other countries. Most of other countries, especially the wealthy ones, are facing these immigration issues. And I think that it is a right for us and for those people, foreigners, to have a liberty and a freedom to move wherever they want to live and settle and work, given the guided rules, if you follow the rules. So I think that we have to open it up, but we have to do it in a way that the society can agree that harmonious inclusion and the integration of foreign cultures, the foreigners, would be more comfortable for the society. I think that not only the trend, but going back to the low birth rate issues and the aging society issues, I think we almost don't have any choice but to open up. And when we do that, make it more palatable and make it more smooth by anticipating many problems, cultural and legal, and getting a solutions ready-made to face those.
Right. It sounds like a very overwhelming task for the country itself as well. There are many things to be considered. And that being said, and moving forward, of course, and back to our topic, so how are foreign domestic workers responding to Seoul's pilot project?
Well, Sunny, for many, this could be a new Korean dream. The news that Korea is planning to introduce foreign domestic workers to Korea is raising hopes for many foreigners who wish to work in Korea. So it not only opens the door to a new group of people who are specialized in the childcare service sector and want to work abroad to make more money for their family, but it also opens the door for foreigners who already work as housekeepers in a foreign country, for instance, in Singapore and Hong Kong, which have an existing system for hiring foreign nannies. Following the South Korean government's announcement of its pilot plan, foreigners have expressed their hope to move to South Korea. The biggest merit is the salary, but it's not only that. Korea's K-wave has many people in Southeast Asia wanting to come and live in Korea. In the Philippines, for instance, as of 2023, the country has almost 30 Korean language schools due to the growing interest in Korean dramas and K-pop music. And for many of them, it does not end with learning Korean as a hobby, but their goal is to eventually make a living in Korea.
Right, I see. Professor Song, speaking as a scholar then, do you suppose the presence of greater domestic helpers here in Capital Seoul will serve to perhaps boost birth rates as well as female presence in the local workforce then?
I think so. I definitely think so. But just in case I'm wrong, that's why the pilot project is so appropriate. I think that there's not much difference in opinions as to a lot has to do with the economic issues when it comes to the birth rate and the female worker participation situation. So helping them out with a foreign nannies with reduced prices, I think they will have a big impact. And there are some evidences in Singapore and Hong Kong that it is the case. But Korea could be different, but we'll find out with the pilot project. And I think because of that, I think a lot of studies and a lot of monitoring has to go in place so that we'll learn as much as possible during the pilot project stage.
Right, of course. So you mentioned Hong Kong and Singapore earlier. What lessons are there to be learned from these two places that have long opened their doors to foreign domestic workers?
Well, for one, Singapore and Hong Kong have a foreign domestic worker hiring system since the 1970s. For similar reasons, as Korea when it started, tackling low birth rates and for encouraging women to pursue their careers. So now in Singapore, almost 1 in 5 households employ a domestic worker. So the system definitely seems to have been welcomed there over the decades. Korean residents in Singapore also commonly have foreign nannies work in their households and live with them. They are getting paid depending on which country they are from or how much expertise they have, meaning minimum wage does not apply to foreign nannies. So this could be one factor Korea may have to look at. As we mentioned before, would you pay 2/3 of what you would pay for Korean nannies? And I also want to quickly mention that Seoul Mayor Oh Se-hoon was actually for not applying the minimum wage system when it comes to these domestic foreign workers, thinking that this would lead to more demand here in the country. However, there are also studies that suggest the birth rate has not really improved due to the system in these other countries. And there is also remaining criticism regarding the modern day slavery, which we also talked about before. So to make Korea's project succeed in the long term, it may be wise to take a slow approach and also make deep considerations when benchmarking from other countries' existing systems. And also, I believe in neighboring Japan, they have also introduced a similar system, but just like Korea, they are applying the minimum wage system. And in Japan too, they had many years before they actually started this program. So maybe we should look at our neighboring country as well, and also countries in Southeast Asia, and then try to find what's best for the capital Seoul and South Korea in its whole.
Right, so we'll take this program in steps then. All right, so thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today. And Professor Song over in the US, thank you very much for your insights.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Right, well, on that note, we end this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching, and do take care, that is, against the typhoon here in the nation.